moving on to the ACC, though. This one is interesting, Garrett,
Mm-hmm.
because we got the top 4, I think, relatively easily. And after that, there were literally 5 guys that we considered for the number 5
Yeah.
spot that I think they're pretty interchangeable at this point. So I think the tiebreaker that we went with was just kind of success in the conference,
Right.
consistency in the conference. But we'll start at the top. And I think it's not going to come to anyone's surprise that Drake May, who, if you're looking at early NFL draft predictions for 2024, is usually QB2 right behind Caleb Williams. And a lot of NFL scouts are really excited about his potential as a prospect. And Drake May, look, he put it on the field at North Carolina last year. A lot of people were really concerned about, what's going to happen now that Sam Howell is not under center. Can Mac Brown's offenses and Longo's offenses continue the success? And the answer was absolutely. Drake May just went out and I think blew everyone's expectations out of the water for his first year starting. I mean, we were literally, before they just collapsed in November, we were having to remind people that, hey, you should maybe pay attention to North Carolina. They are quietly 10-1 or whatever, and, could burst their way into the college football playoff if things fell their way. And obviously things didn't happen that way, but Drake May was the reason that they were, winning all of those ball games. It certainly wasn't the defense, but
Right.
Drake May kind of put the team on his back last year.
No, he really did. He was just a shade worse than Caleb Williams in terms of statistical comparisons. 66% completions, 4,300 yards, 38 touchdowns to just 7 interceptions. And to his credit, he did this without guys like Jordan Addison to throw the ball to. He has talented receivers on that roster.
He had Josh Downs, who was
right. Josh
very
Downs, very good receiver. I don't think he's as good as Jordan Addison. No. Neither did NFL teams. And I think that overall the talent level to pass the ball to at USC was much better than the talent level at North Carolina. And so I'm not saying that he's better than Caleb Williams at all. I'm just saying he did play at a very, very high level and a very comparable level to Caleb Williams without some of those guys. And I think against probably better defenses top to bottom in the league. So we can debate that if we want to, but I think the ACC played a little bit better defense than the Pac-12 last year. And look, he put up some really good games. He had some really good performances. I'm looking at Duke and Pittsburgh, where he went over 380 passing yards both times. Didn't throw a pick. 77% completions against Pittsburgh last year was amazing. He threw 448 against Wake Forest in that game. They just some real big numbers across the year and really kept this team in some games. And, especially I think about that Appalachian State game where they ended up winning that game, but it really looked like they weren't going to win that game.
Yeah.
And so, look, they won that game. It's better than some Power 5 teams can say this last year for Appalachian State, whatever. It's fine. But Drake May did play really well last year, and he should be up there in that conversation about that top quarterback taking off next year's draft.
Yeah. Any other year that Caleb Williams wasn't also going out, I think he would be QB1 on a lot of people's boards.
Yeah.
Moving down the list, I think, you did make a case to switch number 2 and 3. We'll talk about both of these guys together. We did end up putting Jordan Travis at number 2, Florida State quarterback. And the other guy that we considered for number 2 might be a surprise to people if you weren't paying attention to one of the greatest under the radar stories in college football last year, but Riley Leonard out of Duke. Mm-hmm. I think definitely a guy that's not a household name by any stretch of the imagination, but if he repeats his performance, he's going to be very high on a lot of NFL draft boards for 2025 in my mind. So he could definitely be a household name by the end of this year, but ultimately, we're riding the Knowles coin now. We got in a little later than Mitch. Mitch was on the ground floor and is reaping the benefits of that at this point. But we're now riding the Knowles coin as well. And I think Jordan Travis, fantastic season last year, really resurrected the program, kind of burst onto the scene against LSU in that first. I guess that's not totally fair to him. He did have a really nice close to 2021, but really cemented that in that LSU game to start off last season and then never really looked back. He carried that offense, looked fantastic, throwing the ball, running the ball, and, really resurrected the hopes and dreams of that program in Tallahassee.
Yeah, and if you didn't know his name going into the year, you do now.
Yes.
You have to know his name now. And really just culminating in that big win over Oklahoma, where he threw for 418 yards, 2 touchdowns, 71% completions. Very good number for him, and really, really solid. I think Jordan Travis is absolutely one of the better quarterbacks in the country, nonetheless, the conference. And he should be really good this year. His game isn't very gimmicky, he does a lot of things well. The reason we were split on this one, and the reason I really like Riley Leonard here, is you might be surprised to hear it, but Riley Leonard had more total yardage than Jordan Travis last year.
Yes, he did.
He was dominant on the ground as well. He's a good passer. He threw for 2,900 yards, 20 touchdowns, but ran for almost 700 yards, just fell short of it by 1 yard, 699, and 13 touchdowns on the ground. I believe that was most among quarterbacks in college football last year, with those 13 touchdowns. Really, really solid player. And I think he is the underrated reason why Duke had their resurgence last year. Everyone points at the defense. Mike Elko, obviously the defensive coordinator, at multiple stops before making his head coaching debut. But I think that Riley Leonard should get a lot more credit for what they were able to do last year. Not necessarily a dominant team in a lot of ways, not necessarily a crazy offense that put up massive numbers, but they did finish 32nd in scoring in the country.
Yeah.
So maybe a surprising number for a few people, not a number that Duke's necessarily familiar with all that frequently, but a very good quarterback who I think can do a lot in both games. Ultimately, Jordan Travis has accomplished more on the field. He was able to win bigger games, but don't take anything away from what he was able to do on the field at Duke. So
What's fascinating to me, a couple things. I'll confess, I didn't realize Riley Leonard ran for 700 yards last year.
yeah,
I maybe that is enough to flip it in my mind. I still would give the slight edge to Jordan Travis.
I think so.
But man, running for 700 yards, I'll confess, I did not expect to see a number that high. I knew he was efficient on the ground. I knew he did pretty well, but 700 yards and 13 touchdowns to go along with his 20 passing touchdowns is just crazy. I had no idea.
Runner, he's a track star.
Yeah, I mean, noted sprinter Riley Leonard. But the other thing that I'm just going over their schedule again from last year, and we can talk about how great a story it was for them to win 9 games in year 1 for Mike Elko. I think Mike Elko's looking at it and saying it could have been so much better. They lost by 8 points to Kansas on the road. They lost by 3 in overtime to Georgia Tech on the road. They lost by 3 to North Carolina, and they lost by 2 at Pitt. So in their losses, their 4 losses are by a combined 17 points,
and 3 of them, right? 3 of them on the road.
3 of them on the road, absolutely. So they are very, very close. I'm fascinated to watch Riley Leonard go up head to head against our number 4 quarterback, Cade Klubnik, week 1 in a primetime spot. I think that is going to be a fascinating game and really tell us the trajectory of it's going to be an overreaction special. I think.
Oh yeah, for sure.
If Clemson wins that game, maybe if Clemson wins, it's not going to be very overreactionary from the general college football public because, in most people's minds, Clemson is supposed to beat Duke. But if Duke can somehow, and Riley Leonard can somehow knock off Clemson week 1, that hype train is just going to go through the moon when everybody realizes what they did last year. But I do think that's a good transition to get over to Cade Klubnik because this is a guy that had all the heralding coming in last year. Probably should have been put in sooner. I think I'm safe to say that. I think this is a safe space where we can say that. The frustrations with DJU were real. He finally did take over for DJU later in the season, and it was a bumpy ride. I think long term, I think they would have been better off playing Cade Klubnik more last year. I think they knew what they had in DJU, but I can't fault them for playing DJU as much as they did when they definitely still had a shot at the college football playoff. Dance with the one that brought you. I get all that, but towards the end of the season, when he finally did get a shot, it was really the last 2 games, other than spelling DJU for a drive or 2. He had one really good game against North Carolina, where he was dang near perfect throwing the football. And he had one not so good game against a not so stellar Tennessee secondary. So, what do we make of that? Obviously, he's a true freshman last year, all the
Mhm.
talent in the world, but a true freshman. And true freshmen are going to do true freshman things. They're going to have their ups and downs like he did in his 2 starts last year. So, where do you see him coming into this year? Because I think Clemson, we've talked about this before, there's not another Cade Klubnik on the depth chart right now that you can put your fan hopes in as a fan base if Cade is not the guy.
Right. I think if you had asked me last year about this, I would have told you that Cade Klubnik has the ability to be the best quarterback of the conference by the end of the year. I'm not as sure about that this year. I think he could skyrocket. I think he could be 2 by the end of the year if he plays really well. But I just don't think he has what it takes to be that top line, top draft pick type of guy. It might be in there, but I think we saw some stuff with last year at just towards the end of the year. The game against North Carolina, he was very good and efficient, but he wasn't necessarily explosive.
Hmm.
He had one rushing touchdown, one passing touchdown, didn't hit the 300-yard mark. He didn't throw that many passes. He only threw 24 passes. So again, maybe it's just a victim of the passing. He
They
did
were
complete,
running away with that game as well.
yes,
It
and
was
he did
not
complete
close.
83%. So that's a ridiculous stat for that. But that North Carolina defense is famously not very good. We talked about that just 2 seconds ago. North Carolina's defense was not very good last year, and I don't think success against them is necessarily something to hang your hat on. Tennessee also did not have a very good defense last year, and they got smoked
They
in that
shut
game.
down Clemson's offense. Like
Yeah.
they couldn't run the ball, they couldn't throw the ball. It was really the first
Yep.
time all year that Tennessee looked dominant
Well,
on
and of
defense.
course, the clip of Cade just, flailing in the air while he tried to just heave something downfield. You feel bad for the kid because he was running for his life, and Clemson didn't look ready for that in a lot of facets. That wasn't Cade Klubnik's fault. Tennessee was a much better team than Clemson, and they exposed some problems with the Clemson offense. But for what he does hold blame in, he did only complete 55% of his passes and threw 2 picks.
Yep.
So I don't know what I'm supposed to say about him. He's okay. He looked really good in high school. He was super talented in high school. He's played all right so far in college. Maybe with a full off season, maybe with knowing he's the starter, running with the ones for a whole season. Maybe he takes that turn and he's a really good quarterback. I don't think the career is over for Cade Klubnik, but I don't know that he has that upper end talent and upper end potential that we thought he did coming out of high school. He may still have it in there somewhere, but he did not show it to us in his first year in college football.
And this is where we're having to try to balance talent on paper versus what you've shown us in
Mhm.
in the college level. Because if you're talking about just pure talent at the college level, or sorry, excuse me, just production at the college level, Cade should be behind the next 5 guys we
Yeah.
have on our list, undisputed. And this is where it gets kind of silly because these next 5, we literally could throw them in a bag, pull out a name, and I think no one would really argue with whatever one we came up with. So our next tier of 5, and I'll go with the guy that we decided to put at number 5 first. We decided to go Garrett Schrader from Syracuse. And the also rans here, and that sounds mean, but the next tier, I guess, behind that, they're all fighting for that number 5 spot. Jack Plummer, who transfers from Cal to Louisville, who quietly had a very solid season for the Cal Golden Bears last year. Everybody's favorite problem child, Tyler Van Dyke, down at Miami. Brennan Armstrong, who transferred from Virginia to NC State, and Phil Dracovic, who transferred from Boston College to Pitt. So a lot of in-conference transferring here, but Garrett, I know, like we literally put them on a random generator
Yeah.
selection, and then I think I can't remember who actually came up. I think it was Plummer came
Yeah.
up on the
Plumber
random
came up on the
generator.
wheel. That wasn't how we ended up making our decision, because we're better than that. We're not going to make an actual decision on that. We just really couldn't decide, so we thought maybe a wheel would help us. But look, it's these 5 guys. It almost feels like they're all fighting to not take the 5th spot.
They really
Almost
are.
feels like they're like, no, I don't
No
want
one
to be
wants
number
it.
5. You be number 5. And then, Tyler Van Dyke gets in there and he's like, what if I just act like I'm not good at football anymore? And then he goes away. And then Brennan Armstrong is like, hey, I was really good for a season and then decided to suck again. It's really confusing who wants to be this next quarterback.
Oh
I
my
think the reason
gosh.
we went with Garrett Schrader at number 5 at the end of the day was because he is trending in the right direction.
And I
His
think he's
first
the most
year,
consistent too. I think we
yeah,
know what we're gonna get from Garrett Schrader, whereas the other guys might have higher ceilings,
right.
but Garrett Schrader, we know what we're gonna get week in and week out for the most part.
Right. Well, his first year at Syracuse, he not great. 52% completions, 1,400 yards, 9 touchdowns, 4 picks. Really was not a factor in that team being anything. Last year, Syracuse a lot more competitive and looked a lot better, and that's not in any small part due to Schrader and his performance. He did complete 64% of his passes and 2,600 yards and
Syracuse started
17
6-0
touchdowns.
last year. Like we
Yeah,
forget people forget that because they
yeah.
finished 1-5, but
Yeah, don't worry about that. Don't pay no attention to the Syracuse second half record. But they played well. They played well last season. He was a big reason for that. He became what I would consider a pedestrian quarterback, and something that you would say he was just your normal college quarterback, didn't look like anything special, but wasn't shocking you with how bad he was. And he did that, and they ended up playing well. And I know that a lot of that had to do with the running back, but they played well. They played pretty well, and I could see him taking another step in the right direction next season. This is maybe somewhat optimistic, but I could see him maybe sticking around that 26, 27, 2,800 yards, maybe getting up to 20 touchdowns. He could take a step in the right direction, and we could see Syracuse back in a bowl game situation, and we could be there.
yeah, and I think he's like I said, the most consistent. We know what we're going to get from him,
Yeah,
and it's not going to be elite. The ceiling's not that high, but he can manage the game well, and he can lead you to a victory when when it's equal or slight advantage talent to Syracuse. Right? I don't know
right.
that he's going to be the guy to go out and upset one of the top dogs in the conference. He certainly
Probably
wasn't
not.
last year. When you look at the other options, again, Jack Plummer, I think could burst onto the scene this year.
He's the interesting one to me.
I am quietly very excited about Jack Plummer coming over from Cal to Louisville. He was the lone bright spot for the Cal Golden Bears last year.
Hmm.
And he's going into an offense, Jeff Brom's offense at Louisville is going to be, I think, really tailored to his skill set. I think he can be
Yeah,
really successful in that offense. I think he can be kind of Aiden O'Connell light. And I think you're doing cartwheels if you're Louisville,
yeah.
that you got that out of the transfer portal. Who knows what we're going to get from Tyler Van Dyke? Is he going to be, the guy we saw as a freshman that we thought might be a Heisman contender, or is he going to be throwing his team and home fans under the bus on Twitter? Like, who knows with Tyler Van Dyke? He is the one guy on this next tier that could be top 2, I think,
Sure.
if he turns it around. Like, he is the one that's talented enough to be top 2. Brennan Armstrong certainly needed a change of scenery. I think if he has a bounce back here, he could be exciting. And Phil Dracovic just needs to stay healthy. Like, if he can be on
Yeah.
the field, he's going to manage the game for Pitt. But
And maybe put a slight bit more talent around him. I know Zay Flowers is extremely good, but outside of Zay Flowers, that is not a fun offense to watch.
sure, absolutely. But man, this mid tier ACC quarterbacks
Not great.
is not great. And they're all kind of, the Spider-Man meme of just pointing at each other. And, we'll see who kind of comes out on top of this tier.
Gracious him. How about that?